because I was an evangelical Christian. Cast the war in religious terms, that in fact I had said that this was a war between Islam and Christianity. They said that I had called Muslims Satan, and that I had told a warlord in Mogadishu, Somalia, during the events of Black Hawk Down, that my God was bigger than his. It is not a war between Islam and Christianity. It's a war between good and evil. And radical Islam is only one of the forces of evil. There are many other evils.
Something I've been thinking about, right? So I've written about this before, but it is a theme that I come back to. In Germany, and in Denmark and Sweden and Norway and in Scandinavia, as well as in Central Europe, Germany, etc., Belgium, Austria, places like that, before they were Christianized by the Roman Empire, the Germanic tribes and the Vikings, the Norsemen, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, they worshipped a god called Odin. And Odin was this mythical god that promoted valor. And if you want to learn about Odin, you can read the very important book that I got a lot out of, Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History. The first chapter is all about Odin. And that the ancient Norsemen, the pre-Christian Europeans, they worshipped Odin. And Odin was a god of grit and valor and sacrifice. He was an old man with a beard, and Odin had a special heaven called Valhalla that you only got to go into if you died in battle. And Odin was somebody you prayed to in order to get epic strength so you could just go out and defeat your enemy and, be full of courage and have a battle high. Some of these Vikings would actually take mushrooms, magic mushrooms, and get high on mushrooms before they went into battle. And they called them berserkers. So if you ever heard that expression, they went berserk, what that was, that's from the ancient Vikings that would take mushrooms. So they were, they wouldn't feel pain, or they were stoned or whatever. And they would go and fight in battle. And people said they were berserk. They were insane because they didn't feel any pain because they were high on mushrooms. And that, the Viking raiders, the Vandal tribes, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, they prayed to this god called Odin, and they worshipped strength and grit and valor. And that was their religion. And Odinism, I guess, is currently practiced by a lot of prisoners. A lot of white prisoners in American jails worship Odin. And there's a lot of Nazis and white supremacists who worship Odin. Odin is a pre-Christian deity of Europe. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I have noted that a lot of American culture has Odinist overtones, right? That Odinism is a big influence on the American mindset, the American way of life. And you wouldn't think, though. We're always hearing that this is a Christian nation founded by, English religious dissenters and people coming here for religious freedom. And it tends to be Christianity that is considered the American way. However, first of all, American Christmas, right? American Christmas, we have Santa Claus. And this guy who comes around once a year, who's got a really long beard, and he comes around once a year. That was Odin. Right? Odin was a guy with a big, long beard who came around once a year on Yuletide to blow life back into the earth. And they celebrated his coming with wreaths on the door. A lot of the American Christmas traditions, Christmas trees, Christmas wreaths, that's Odinism. Santa Claus, right? Man who comes around once a year. Jolly old man with a beard who comes around Christmas time, around the Yuletide or whatever. That's very Odinist. The other thing, and I can't get over this enough, and this is what I wanted to talk about. Right? I will never forget, right? And this is actually illegal according to the U.S. Supreme Court, but it probably still goes on and it's not the worst thing in the world, right? There was a time in my life where I got angry over this kind of thing. I don't really get angry over it. It's just a reality. And I think it doesn't happen as much as it used to. But in my little town in Ohio, before the basketball game, before the football game, right, you would see all the players and the coach would join hands and pray before the game, right? That probably still happens. You go to the southern towns, right? You go to the Midwest, more conservative areas, right? And it's illegal in a public school. In a public school, the U.S. government is not supposed to have any state-sanctioned prayer. School staff cannot be leading any religious ritual, but it probably still goes on. In my town, they just completely ignored that. We had 2 prayers at graduation, not just one, and before every football game, before every basketball game, all the players were joining hands, led by the coach, and they would pray before the game. And I look back on that and I realize that what were these players and coaches praying before the game? What were they praying? Were they praying, "Dear Jesus, help me love the other team. Help me see things from the other team's perspective. Help me to feel, be in touch with God with all my heart and soul and mind, and help me to love the other team as I love myself, and think about other people and how I affect them and live for the sake of it." They're not praying that. They're not praying that. You know what they're praying before the basketball game, before the football game. They're there saying, "Dear God, help me to play as hard as I possibly can. Give me the biggest amount of strength that I could possibly have to just go out there on the field and just demolish the other team. Let me just vanquish the other team and just demolish them and win the giant trophy. Give me the strength to be a sports hero like I watch on ESPN or in my favorite sports movie. Let me be big and strong and powerful and demolish my opponent and walk away victorious as the one who fought the hardest." That's what they're praying. And that's what they're praying, right? That, anyone who knows anything about football and basketball and sport culture, that's what they're praying. Well, that's not a Christian prayer. That's an Odinist prayer. Jesus is not telling his followers, "If you worship me, I will make you strong and powerful, and I'll teach you how to go out and sacrifice and fight." And that's not in the Bible. That's not in the Bible, right? They're not praying to Jesus before the basketball game, right? That you are not praying to Jesus before the basketball game. You're not praying to the Christian God before the basketball game. You're praying to Odin. Right? Oh, if you want to go out and sacrifice, right? The story is that Odin had a special heaven, Valhalla, that only those who died in battle could go to. And so when the old Norsemen were on their dying beds, they would take knives and they would cut themselves so that Odin would think they had died on the battlefield and would allow them to enter the halls of Valhalla. Right? That's Odinism, right? And that the tradition of praying before sporting events and the prayers that they are praying are very, very, very Odinist. So that's the one thing. They're very, very competitive. They're very much about grit and valor and sacrifice and triumph. And, that's Odinism, my friends. That is not Christianity. But then I've said this for years. This is nothing new. I've been talking about Odinism and the Odinist influence on American culture for years, right? And how the kind of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps attitude that's part of the American culture is not just, we always blame that on Calvinism, right? About the Protestant work ethic and all that. I think it goes back a little bit deeper, right? And America is a very German country. One point, Miller was the most common last name. That's a German last name. It comes from Muller, right? What is the most American food? Hot dog. What's a hot dog? That's a Frankfurter, a Frankfurt sausage. So they started calling it hot dogs after World War I because we didn't want to be eating a German food. And a hamburger. Is there any ham on your burger? No, right? Hamburgers are not made out of pig. They're not made out of swine, right? The hamburger is made out of cow. So why do they call it a hamburger? That's because it's a sandwich that came from Hamburg, Germany. That's why it was a hamburger sandwich, right? It was, a sandwich from Hamburg. So America is very, very German, and that I would argue that there's a very, very Odinist influence. But then the other day, I was thinking about a song, and I'm not going to play the song on here because I think this song, actually, it is a Christian song that I heard endlessly growing up, which is actually apparently not that popular anymore. And I'm not going to play it on here because I think it is blasphemous. I think it is wrong, but it was one of the most popular evangelical Christian songs of the 90s and early 2000s. And I remember it. Our God is an awesome God, right? Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. And I sang that at many church camps and many gatherings as a kid growing up. It's just a really common evangelical song from that era. It's funny. I remember I was someplace and I remember hearing them play it on Christian radio. And the announcer said, I think we're going to be hearing this song for the next 100 years. This song is so important. And actually, I don't hear it anymore. It's really not that popular anymore. I think our culture has changed a lot. But regardless, it was a big Christian song from the 90s and stuff. I think Rich Mullins, is that his name? Rich Mullins is the guy who originally sang it. But I was thinking about that song the other day, and I realized that song, that's an Odinist song, and it's actually quite an evil song. There is very, very little in that song. There's one line about if you read the verses of the song, right? It's about God kicking them out of Eden. It's about God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. It's about God, punishing people. And there's very little in that song. There's one line about the mercy and grace he gave us at the cross. But almost every line in that song is God is big and mighty and powerful and punishes people. And on top of that, it's also you better get in line or else God is going to punish you. It's an awful song. The other thing that's weird, you took the words out of my mouth, Ryan. Why is it our God? Right? Christianity says there's only one God. So why are we singing about our God is an awesome God? No, it should be God is an awesome God. But our God is stronger than your God. That's Odin. That's Odin. That's what Odin said. Oh, there were many gods. The Norse, the Norsemen, they believed in multiple gods, but they believed their God, Odin, was the most mighty and strong God of them all. Right? It's a song called Awesome God, Gabby, which I sang at church camp. I sang growing up. It was just a really big part of being, a young Christian in the 2000s. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. I'm not going to play it on here because I think it's an evil song. And I think about that song, and it's Odinism, right? The message of the song is not that God loves and forgives. It's not to live for the sake of others, love your neighbor as yourself. It's not about doing what's right. It's about God is big and mighty and powerful, and he's going to kill and destroy people who get in his way, and we're on his team, and so that's awesome. And also, we better be good or he's going to kill and destroy us. It ends, I think the last line of the song is, he's coming soon, he's going to return, so we better not forget that he's awesome. So God's going to come back, right? He's going to return and punish all of us, and if we don't get in line. It's a really, really, really non-Christian song. It's really, really dark, and it's really, really, but when you think about it, it's also, and this is what I was thinking about, it's a very, very unhealthy parental transference, right? So we talk about Sigmund Freud on here. I believe Sigmund Freud was not a good dude. I think he was probably a sociopath to some degree or other, but because he was kind of indifferent to other people's emotions, he sat down with people. He had a lot of people on the couch. He interviewed prisoners and college students, thousands of them, and just asked them about their lives and their personal feelings. And he started to understand what drives people. He came up with the concept that you have an ego, which is your conscious mind. You have an id, which is your bodily desires. You have a superego, which is, the parental figure that you look up to, that you want to please, right? Teenagers, they have the Oedipal drive. They want to kill their parents. They want to rebel. You have your sexual feelings and aggression are linked, but you also have transference. You have this desire for a parental figure that's all powerful, that can take care of you. It's like from the time you're an infant, a baby will die if it doesn't have a parent who takes care of it, right? So we all have this need for a parental figure who will take care of us. We all want to kill our parents because we want to rebel, and we all, have a sex drive, and we have libido, and that there are different impulses that manifest themselves throughout life. This is all Sigmund Freud, and I think it's actually very, very brilliant. This is how humans think, right? And that they have different impulses and drives, and that I tend to think that the psychoanalytic approach of like helping you to become aware of your impulses, what is motivating you, is actually a very helpful thing. I don't think Freud was a good guy, and to some degree or other, he used it for self-gain, right? He was having sex with all the women who were his clients, and he also, at the same time, he was using it to make money, and he was a very indifferent person. He didn't care about people. He lacked empathy, and he was very anti-religious. If you read Civilization and its Discontents, he says he can't relate to this universal feeling of oneness that all of his clients that are Christians say they feel like they can connect to God, they can connect to a higher power. And he says, I can't relate to this at all. This is weird. Maybe it's left over from, Freud was not a good dude, but bad people can have useful insights. And in fact, I think that Freud had useful insights because he was a bad person. If it had been anybody else doing his work, they probably would have they would have connected with the people too much to actually just kind of sit back and look at them. Freud was looking at his clients kind of like a scientist, dissecting a frog or something. He didn't care. He lacked human empathy. And because he lacked human empathy, he could kind of look at humans in this kind of cold way and be like, okay, what motivates them? And that caused him to have brilliant insights into how people think. And I think that's very, very important. So back to the main point, which is that Freud said we all have this desire for a parental figure who will protect us, right? And that manifests itself in terms of religion. That's one thing that everybody acknowledges, right? Why is it all the prayers is God our Father, right? Or Heavenly Parent, right? Or whatever, right? I mean, that God is the ultimate superego. God is the conscience, the voice of right, the one challenging you to do the right thing. And Christianity teaches you'll never be good enough, right? You'll never be good enough, and that you will never be good enough for your superego, right? You have a voice in your head that is always saying you could do better. It's saying you could treat people better. You could be kinder to people. You could achieve and work harder, right? You have a superego, right, that is never satisfied. And that's a part of the guilt that we all have. And if you look at Christianity, right, the idea is that none of us are good enough for God, right? That all of us, all of us fall short of the expectations of God. All of us are sinners, but luckily through Jesus Christ, we can receive forgiveness, right? So we're never going to be good enough for God. But God is this very forgiving person, and Jesus died on the cross so we can all receive forgiveness. So it's going to be all right. And that it's good to have somebody in your head, and it's good to have something that is demanding the impossible from you, demanding that you do the best you possibly can, pushing you to be better. But it's also good that voice is very, very forgiving, and that the Christian message is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Jesus is asked by his I think it's the Pharisees confront Jesus, and they say to Jesus, they say to him, which of the 10 commandments is the most important commandment? Which one is it? And he says, the most important commandment is to love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And everything else will flow from that. All the other laws flow from that. And so they were trying to trick him by getting him in trouble for saying that one commandment was more important than the other. And he said all the commandments really just boil down to being in love with the creator and with the higher power, with the universal prime energy that created the world, and caring about other people and having empathy, right? And that if you can do that, of course you're not going to steal. Of course you're not going to murder. Of course you're not going to commit adultery. Of course you're not going to do all these other things, right? Because you're loving your creator and you're loving other people, right? And that it's more about your intentions rather than the letter of the law. And that was, Jesus is fighting with the Pharisees and the scribes, and he's saying to them, look, you guys are stuck on the legalism, on the, crossing the I and dotting the T. Whereas my message is if we can just have the right, if our heart can be right, we won't have to have that, right? And another example is Jesus is confronted for healing people on the Sabbath. He's healing people on the Sabbath. right? And they confront him and they say, you're violating the laws of the Sabbath. And he says to the Pharisees, the Sabbath was created for man. Man was not created for the Sabbath. These rules weren't invented so we can arbitrarily follow them. Rather, the idea is that human beings need a day of rest. They need a day to chill out. They can't work, all week. They need, after 6 days of work, you need a day to rest. And that the Sabbath was invented for man. Man was not invented for the Sabbath. And that the leaders, the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the scribes, they were all caught up in this legalism. And Jesus is saying, actually, you got to get your heart right. And that's Christianity, right? And there's an element of parental transference. The idea is God is the ultimate superego who's pushing you to do the right thing. But if you fail to do the right thing, he will forgive you. And that's what's amazing about Christianity. This is Christianity from a psychoanalytic perspective. This is Christianity from I'm looking at this from many different angles in my life. I come out of Marxism. That's my background and tradition. But I also, I've studied psychoanalysis. I'm become more religious. And so I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this, and that song, Awesome God, if you look at it, that is a very, very unhealthy parental transference, in that it sees the parent as a harsh, cruel punisher, right? I mean, the song might as well be called "My Dad Could Beat Up Your Dad." Might as well be what it's called, right? It's our God, as if there are other gods, is the strongest and the most mighty, and he kicked him out of Eden, and he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's rolling up his sleeves. It's basically, that's what the song is saying. It's like, my dad is such a mean, big, strong bully, and when people get in his way, he beats the crap out of them, and I'm terrified of him, and I better obey him. But, you mess with him, other people that are on the other team, he's going to kick your ass, right? I mean, it's a really, really unhealthy parental transference. My dad is a very violent, abusive punisher, is basically what it's saying, and he will violently abuse you if you get on my way. So luckily, he's on my team, but I better obey him, or else he's going to violently, abusively punish me. It's pretty messed up, right? That's not a healthy relationship, right? That's not a healthy way that one should interact with one's father. I mean, that's like someone who has been very badly abused, right? Somebody who somebody who at the same time that they're abused is kind of their parents' property, right? And that's one thing about kind of abusive parental relationships, is like, on the one hand, the parent is very abusive to the child, giving them harsh punishments, doling out and expressing their anger on the child. But then on the other hand, right, if somebody else, if one other kid touches their kid, they run down there and they grab that kid. You don't touch my son, right? And that tends to be how abusive people tend to be, right? Is that they're very possessive. They take people and they view them as possessions, right? And this is domestic violence in relationships. An abusive husband, right? He will be very, very much see his wife as his possession. So if his wife pisses him off, he'll be abusive to her. But if some other man whistles at his wife, or if he'll threaten them and beat them up, it's like they're seeing God as the image of an abusive father figure, of an abusive, possessive father figure. That's what they're seeing God as. That's very unhealthy. It's very, very unhealthy, right? A parent, right? It is a drive that we all have, but, a parent who will push you to do the best that you can, a parent who will love and forgive you, will comfort you when you're down, right? That's a much more healthier thing. But that song, Awesome God, is a very, very Odinist song about God is so mighty and so powerful, but it's also a very, very unhealthy parental transference. That's really what it is. And you think about a lot that has been written about, well, I don't know, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I was thinking about that, and I'm like, that song is very, very Odinist. And that song is not very Christian. There's not much in that song about loving your neighbor as yourself. There's not much in that song about forgiveness and forgiving people. There's not much in that song about, it's all just grit and valor and sacrifice. So on these streams, many times I have talked about this, and that I see an overlap between philosophical irrationalism and Odinism. They're not the same thing. Philosophical irrationalism says there is no truth. Odinism is a religion that existed in Europe prior to Christianity. That was a religion that very much said might makes right, but it was collectivist. It was a collectivist religion. I mean, it wasn't individualist, right? Those Vikings all worked together, right? But it was very much a religion that didn't value, it valued team solidarity, right? Of we're all on the same team, right? In our tribe, and we're going to be mighty, and we have this mighty God that we pray to. So it wasn't individualist, and it wasn't saying that there is no truth and you can define the truth with your will. It wasn't radical individualism and anti-collectivism, which is a big part of Nietzsche and Ayn Rand and Leo Strauss and all of that. So it's not the same as philosophical irrationalism, but it still has this lack of, that collectivism, to be real collectivism, requires empathy. You have to care about other people if you're going to be working together as a team. And you have to have compassion, and you have to be willing to forgive people who make mistakes. And that collectivism requires people to be nice. There is mean collectivism out there, right? There is, I mean, that's a whole history. They talk about collective punishment, right? If one kid is talking, they punish the whole class, and then the idea is that all the other kids will be mad at that kid, and that'll make that kid stop talking. So collectivism can be mean. Collectivism can be punitive, right? There's no question about it. Not all collectivism is kind, but to have real collectivism, when people really feel like they're on the same team, you do need to have compassion and kindness. So now Huey Long disagrees with my analysis of the song, and that's fine. And you're allowed to disagree with me, but I tell me where I'm wrong. I don't see that song as healthy. I see that song as a very, very dark song. And the other thing is that, and again, our God, right? What is that? Right? It's not God, it's our God, as if there are other gods and he's going to beat down and destroy them. That's very Odinist, and that's really unhealthy. But the other thing is, there was a general in the Bush era, right? I remember when the USA invaded Iraq, General Boykin was a member of the U.S. military, who was a big Bush supporter and evangelical. And he actually said, our God is stronger than their God. That's what he said about the war against Islam. He said, our God is stronger than their God, right? Boykin, our God, right? General Boykin, Jerry Boykin, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin of the Delta Force. And he worked with the Family Research Council. He said, the reason we're in a war against Islam and our God is stronger than their God, right? And he said, I know that my God is real and that their God is an idol. And that he tells the Muslims, you have underestimated our God, right? This guy he was using our God. He was saying that over and over again as he was justifying kind of a war against Islam, right? And you listen to that guy. I don't think that guy was associated with Family Research Council. He was an evangelical Christian, but you look at the statements that William Boykin, the U.S. Army general, made, right? His remarks about the U.S. battling Satan. It was in 2003. He said, the war on terror is the U.S. battling Satan. He said, quote, I knew my God was bigger than his. I knew that my God was real. It was a real God, and his God was an idol. Ouch. And then also he said, George W. Bush, why is this man in the White House? The majority of Americans did not vote for him. Why is he there? I tell you this morning, is that he is in the White House because God put him there. There you go. George W. Bush was not elected by a majority of the voters. He was appointed by God. That's a direct quote from this guy, Jerry Boykin. And so at the same time the USA was invading Iraq, as the neoconservatives were riding high, the Bush administration was the height of neoconservatism. Part of it was the evangelical Christian right. And the evangelical Christian right was very much Odinist. It was Odinism dressed up as Christianity in a lot of ways, right? I mean, and you read the statements. I can show you. This is actually his wiki quote page, right? You can read all the stuff Jerry Boykin said. That stuff and the song, that I've been referencing here, that I won't be singing for you all, it all matches, right? It all matches. And so I just wanted to share that with all of you tonight.